guitar players, we have a problem. Not because we don't have enough guitars. No, that's not it. There are so many good instruments available nowadays out there that sometimes I find it difficult to understand where the price differences are actually coming from. And the more guitars I get to play, especially so-called cheap ones, the more I catch myself asking whether we're always paying more for a better instrument or whether sometimes we're simply just paying more. And that's what I want to find out in this video. And therefore, I have on one side my lovely Maybach Texonian T61, a guitar I'd call a high-class guitar, and on the other hand, I have the Henry's Space, which follows a similar guitar idea, but in a completely different price range. And once you reach that kind of difference, I think it's fair to ask where the money actually goes. Now, to make this very clear, this isn't going to be a which guitar is better video, it's a worst difference video. And therefore, let's put both guitars through a few simple tests and see where things start to separate or if they separate at all. So let's first start with some first impressions. What I check here is when I sit down with a new guitar is how does the neck feel? How comfortable does it sit on the body or on the lap? Do the controls feel solid? How does the hardware feel? How does it tune? That's the first impressions that I got. None of these things make guitars sound better, but they do shape your perception of the instrument and are an important part of the equation. And to be fair, I know my T61 very well. Is this an unfair comparison then? Well, no, because I don't compare the situation now, but more the moment I first touched the guitar and I reflect the feeling that I had when I first held it in my hands. And you can do that as well. Pick up a guitar and try to remember what you thought for the first time when you picked it up for the first time. And I'm sure you know what you thought back then. And these first impressions tell you maybe more than you later admit. And if a guitar releases a negative first thought, I wouldn't buy it. Ever. And the next step, we're checking the unplugged resonance. This is one of those topics that guitar players love to argue about, but I can only measure with my standards I usually work with, and the natural character of an instrument is really important, at least to me. Will this protect how the guitar sounds through an amp? Probably not, but it does give me the first impression of how alive and how responsive the instrument feels in my hands. Yep, that's a guitar. The Space 2 resonates so good, as well as the T61. Both with slight differences in volume and dynamic and thickness, I would say. So they both pass this test. Now it's time to plug them in. For this first test, we'll be looking at clean and edge of breakup tones, because that's usually where the guitar's characters is easiest to hear. Before, I'll use a preset on my Quad Cortex with a Plini plugin and a little bit of reverb, a little bit of delay, and a subtle vibrato. And important, don't start solo. Use some chords over the whole fretboard and see if they resonate and intonate well, like this. What I'm also listening for is whether one guitar offers something noticeable difference in terms of clarity or character. So far, we've kept things fairly civilized. So let's crank up the gain. And what I want you to mind is to how the strings separate sound-wise when you crank up the gain. Okay, let's go. Hear that on Maybach you have beautiful string separations. All strings are traceable sound-wise, even with higher gain settings. On the Henrys, there's still separation between the strings, but it all gets a tiny little bit muddier and like tiny little bit less detectable, tiny little bit. That doesn't make sense at all. But when it comes to lead lines, the Henrys shows its glance by singing beautifully. Listen. Okay, and now for the final test, we're getting a little bit rude. We'll be looking at tuning stability and how the guitar intonates when you put some pressure on it. I strum some heavy chords, I play some bands, do some of these neck vibrato things, and beat the shit out of the guitar to see which stays more in tune and which takes the pressure a little bit better in general. Alright, I think we have a winner. Every guitar I check goes through these 5 tests, and if the guitar passes all tests, it's worth thinking about buying it, no matter what price I pay or what stands on the headstock. What I've found here is 2 guitars that are much closer together than their price tags would suggest. The Maybach has slightly more advantage when it comes to overall playability. The neck feels a little more refined and the handling's excellent, and the low weight makes it incredibly more comfortable to play for longer periods. It's the guitar that feels just easier and more effortless in my hands, which again I know because I own that guitar for 10 years now, and out of all guitars it's my second favorite played one, this one. The Henrys, on the other hand, surprised me most when it came to the sound. It has a slightly bigger and fuller voice sound, and the body shaping makes it very, very comfortable because it has rounded edges and compared to the Maybach. But let's get back to the main topic, the price difference and how it comes to be. The truth is that guitar pricing isn't linear. You've got to understand that. Modern manufacturing is so good that even relatively affordable instruments can be fantastic, which means getting the first 80 or 90% of great guitars is surprisingly affordable these days. The expensive part is chasing the last few percentages, and that's where companies start to invest more into fretwork, into setup, into hardware, into tuning stability. People who build the guitar deliver all the details that don't immediately jump out at you in a YouTube video demo, but absolutely influence how the guitar feels in your hands. So if you want an analogy from a sports perspective, it's a bit like training in the gym or losing weight. Getting the first 90% of your potential is difficult, yes, but achievable. Getting from 90 to 100% takes a disproportional amount of effort, time, and attention compared to everything that came before. And that's maybe a rule you can find everywhere in life. And I think that's exactly what we're seeing in this comparison. The Henrys get so remarkably close to the Maybach, from 600 to 2,000 euro or 2,500 euro. This one gets remarkably close to the Maybach in some areas. As the solo sounds, I even preferred it. The Maybach, however, starts pulling ahead in those smaller details that make a guitar feel, I just can say, more refined and effortless and incredibly stable over a long run. So no, I don't think that the Maybach is overpriced, but I also don't think the Henrys should be underestimated. If anything, this comparison showed me just how much Guitar Henrys is delivering for 600 euros. For that tally, that's an awesome deal. But if you want the 100%, you gotta invest the money, and that leads you directly into a price range where most of us rather book a nice holiday instead of buying a guitar. Now, I'm curious what you think. If you ignored the logos in the headstock and looked only at the result of these tests, which guitar would you have guessed was the more expensive one? And more importantly, do you think the differences we found today justify the roughly 1,500 euro gap between them? Let me know. As always, thank you for hanging out and thank you for watching. I'll catch you in the next hangout.